Good morning. My name is Sarah Rubin. I am the Department of Conservation's Outreach and Engagement Advisor. I'm going to be facilitating this morning. Welcome to our overview of SB 905, the carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration requirements. It's very exciting that so many of us are here together today. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about interpretation. Next slide. Okay. I am going to ask one of our three interpreters, Marco, to go over interpretation in español.
Thank you. Muy buenos días a todos que nos acompañan para la sesión del día de hoy. Queremos dejarles saber que tenemos interpretación al vivo para su beneficio. Para escuchar el programa en español, aparecerá aquí en breve en la parte inferior de su pantalla un icono con un globo que dice Interpretation o interpretación. Selecciónelo y de ahí seleccione su idioma, Spanish o español, y podrá escuchar todo el programa en su idioma. We'd also like to note for those listening in English, if there happens to be a comment or a question given in Spanish, you can also hear a live interpretation. Please select the globe icon that will appear at the bottom of your screen momentarily. It says interpretation, and then select your language, English, and you'll then be able to hear a live rendering of that Spanish comment into English. Thank you, Sarah. Back to you.
Thank you so much. All right, welcome. So many of you have come in just even in the last couple of minutes. So one more time, welcome. Next slide, Jamie. My name is Sarah Rubin. If I haven't met you yet, I am with the California Department of Conservation. I'm going to review our agenda and then we are going to dive right in to our content and then hearing from you. So we're in the middle of our welcome. Glad you're here. Next, my colleague LaQuinn is going to give us some context setting. And then we will have an overview from CARB. Next, we will hear from my colleague Lisa Halco on an overview of the framework for legal agreements. Then my other colleague Jeremy from the California Geological Survey will give us an overview of the new geologic carbon sequestration group. And then we will wrap up with a fabulous presentation from the Energy Commission. Then we will get to hearing from you all, which we're really looking forward to. I'll explain public comment when we get there because we have quite a few presentations. Today's meeting is being recorded. So if you have a friend or colleague who couldn't come this morning, they can watch it later. We also have a repeat, at least presentation-wise, of this meeting tonight at 5:30. And if you find this valuable, we'd encourage you to share the link with your colleagues or friends who might be interested in watching tonight. Tonight will be recorded, and so there'll be two versions of the same meeting with obviously a wide variety of comments that folks can look at later. Okay, next slide. All right. So LaQuinn, I'm going to go ahead and hand over our virtual microphone to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for making time to join us this morning. As Sarah mentioned, my name is LaQuinn Nguyen, and I'm the Deputy Secretary for Energy at the California Natural Resources Agency. Before we jump into the presentations, I just want to provide some brief context for this meeting and touch on some of the things that you'll hear today. So most, if not all of us, have experienced and likely been impacted by the impacts of climate change. As with this latest extreme heat event, climate change is causing weather events that are more severe, widespread, frequent, and unpredictable, which highlights the urgency with which we need to address climate change. So in California, we have ambitious climate and energy goals intended to address climate change. And achieving those goals is going to take every single tool available to us. And in CARB's 2022 scoping plan, they identify carbon removal as one of those tools that we need to achieve carbon neutrality. There's a variety of actions that we're taking at the state level on carbon removal. So you'll see there's natural and working lands that we're using, such as forests, open space, and ag land conservation that's used to sequester carbon, as well as mechanical carbon removal. This morning, we're going to focus mostly on mechanical carbon removal with an emphasis on SB 905 and AB 1279. So you'll hear from my colleagues at CARB and CGS on their SB 905 related work. And then you'll also hear from my colleague, Lisa Halko from the Department of Conservation, who's working with me on implementation of the CNRA portion of SB 905. And then you'll also hear from my colleagues at the Energy Commission on their work related to carbon removal. So I hope all of you attending the meeting will be able to stay till the very end. I really look forward to hearing any comments you have and feedback for us. So thank you again. And with that quick overview, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Rajinder Sahota.
Thank you, LaQuinn. This is Rajinder Sahota, the Deputy Executive Officer for Climate Change and Research at the California Air Resources Board. I want to thank our colleagues at CNRA and the partner sister agencies for joining me today on this important discussion, or alternative me joining them. Anyway, as you'll see, it is an all-of-government approach on how to address climate change, and 905 emerged as one of the key pieces of legislation along with AB 1279, which I will go into in a few slides. So with that, next slide, please. I think it's important to actually lay out how California's climate policy framework is structured. We get high-level targets and goals from the legislature and from the executive orders from the governor's office, and those can take the form of SB 905, it can be AB 1279, AB 32, SB 32, the ZEB executive order that Governor Newsom signed in 2020. But all of those separate pieces of legislation and direction come together in the scoping plan, which AB 32 requires CARB to update every 5 years. So in the scoping plan for 2022 that was adopted last December, we lay out a path on how to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century and how to reduce fossil emissions and anthropogenic emissions by 85% below 1990 levels by 2045. That plan is on our website, and I believe there's going to be links that are dropped into the chat, or you can look on our website to read the details on the appendices. But it really laid out a cost-effective and technologically feasible path to achieve the long-term targets. But to implement that plan, there are many agencies involved, many levels of government, including local government, that look at regulations and incentives. So for example, for the electricity sector, we have the SB 100 process that is with CEC, CPUC, and CARB. We also then have regulations such as those at CARB, such as Advanced Clean Cars, SB 905, and SB 535. All of these programs fit together to actually make change happen on the ground, because plans and regulations are great, but what we want to see is change in the physical landscape to make sure that we're actually reducing those pollution levels in the atmosphere. And whether it's incentives, regulations, or any other kind of policy, it all comes down to making something happen on the ground in the form of projects, whether it's utility scale solar or renewable power, such as wind, or renewable hydrogen, or dairies, or compost facilities. All of this comes down to projects actually happening to either stop emissions from happening into the atmosphere or removing emissions from the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So in the 2022 scoping plan, we had two aspects. The first one focused on all of the anthropogenic sources, and by that I mean industry, manufacturing, and energy. And it looked at existing and emerging fossil fuel alternatives and clean technologies that aligned with all the statutes and executive orders. The second component of the scoping plan was about land management, because as LaQuinn mentioned, natural working lands can also be helpful in removing carbon dioxide, but they are also a source of emissions. And so significant effort was put into how to manage those or restore those natural working lands so that over the long term, they are not a source of emissions, but they begin to sequester carbon, but they are managed in a more sustainable manner. Next slide, please. So in that scoping plan, what you see in that chart on the right is in 2022, the emissions by the sectors for recycling and waste, industrial, power, and agriculture, transportation, buildings, and high global warming potential gases such as refrigerants. If we implemented all of the actions in the scoping plan, by 2045, that bar shrinks down by 85%, or down to 15% that's left in that smaller bar. So that means we reduced emissions by 85% from 1990 levels by 2045. But the details matter. And so in AB 1279, not only do we have to hit that 85% reduction by 2045 in that small bar, but we also have to make sure that we deploy CCS and carbon dioxide removal to get to that reduction that we see in 2045. As such, AB 1279 codified those targets for 2045, but it was passed alongside with 905, so they were moved together as a package of legislative direction. And that was a recognition that you can't get to zero. You cannot get to zero based on the technologies and fuels that we have today. And so in 905, there is a requirement for CARB to establish a 905 carbon capture sequestration program in coordination with our sister agencies. We already have a CCS protocol at CARB that was developed during a multi-year process, and it allows for CCS and DAC projects, DAC being direct air capture, and I'll describe those in a couple more slides. But if we're going to have the scale of deployment of those technologies by 2045, we have to start implementing and scaling them now. So that means bringing pilot projects on, starting to do the work to lay the foundation, to learn about those technologies and scale them up at the level needed for 2045. Next slide. And it can't all just be about removing carbon. We actually have to stop emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So this slide is directly from the scoping plan, and it shows that if we do the actions called for in the scoping plan, we actually see a reduction in emissions from petroleum refining in 2045. And that's that middle bar. So 2022 is that tall bar, 2045 is that middle bar. But if those operations have to remain because we have ongoing need for some of that fossil fuel, then we can further reduce emissions from those facilities by applying CCS. And that is that smaller bar on the far right. So the story just isn't about removing carbon. It is actually about continuing to reduce emissions where they are occurring today and making sure that all of these tools are available at the same time to help achieve our targets. Next slide. So there's a history on the role of carbon dioxide removal in the 2022 scoping plan and some of the emerging work that's happened in this policy area. As we were developing the scoping plan in 2022, Governor Newsom sent a letter to our chair, and it called for a 20 million metric ton removal of carbon by 2030 and 100 million metric tons of carbon removal by 2045. So those are reflected in the scoping plan. And we further showed how you could use CCS and CDR to achieve that AB 1279 target, even though that target was established towards the end of 2022. The federal incentives have also recognized the need and importance of these technologies, and that there are ongoing incentives for both CCS and CDR. And in the federal proposed power plant rule, you have the option as a power plant to use CCS on your smokestack if you need it to help meet those federal targets. And then, of course, there's nature-based solutions such as trees, sequestration in trees, sustainable ag management and soil. So all of these are important parts and are being looked at not just at California, but even at the federal level as ways to remove carbon. Next slide. There's also the science-based role of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide removal can remove emissions that have already happened and persist in the atmosphere. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have continued to emit at levels never before seen in Earth's history. And so we can return some of those emissions back into geological storage or other products by sequestering or by removing and sequestering those. And then some emission sources such as cement and maybe power in the near term and refining may not have all of the technologies and fuels to completely get to zero at their smokestacks. So CCS can actually be a way to help reduce those emissions from even being emitted into the atmosphere. This technology has been demonstrated and in use across Europe, US, and it has been proven to support low zero carbon energy supplies such as ethanol. And I think the key thing for us that we learned in 2022 was, even though this technology has been around for decades, even going back to the 1970s, it didn't really become a tool people talked about for addressing climate change until recently, because climate change has accelerated in a way that we didn't expect decades ago. And now all of the tools that are available need to be on the table, including removing carbon in addition to reducing emissions. And so there's a recognition in international climate change forums that we need all tools, including carbon removal. Next slide, please. So this graphic actually shows the way that we think about these technologies and the different ways to remove carbon. In carbon capture and storage, CCS, in that far left corner, that is really capturing from a facility such as a power plant, a refinery, or an ethanol plant. So it's something that attaches to that smokestack and captures carbon for sequestration purposes. Then there's a broader category of carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and that is pulling carbon out of the ambient air. So not attached to a facility, but just a passive piece of equipment sitting out there pulling in carbon. And there's both nature-based and mechanical. And nature-based, again, is natural and working lands, such as storage of carbon in trees and other biomass. And then there's mechanical, and there's two types of mechanical. One is direct air capture and sequestration, and the other is when you take biomass and then you use it to generate energy, but then you also sequester any smokestack emissions from that into the ground. So this graph is a great reference to understand how all of these different technologies fit together and how they are categorized. Next slide, please. So the role and scaling of carbon dioxide removal really depends on how much we are able to reduce emissions from the AB32 sectors, that's industry, manufacturing, and refrigeration, and all of those other building, commercial, residential uses that we have. And relative to that is what happens in natural working lands. If natural working lands can flip over to be a sink of emissions in the near term, then you have less of a need for carbon dioxide removal to achieve carbon neutrality. If we're not able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial and fossil sectors, and natural working lands continue to be a source of emissions mid-century, then we're going to need more carbon dioxide removal to achieve carbon neutrality. And it's really that balance. How do you make sure that what is going into the air is then compensated for and sequestered at the same time out of the air? Net negative would be pulling out even more than you emit, and then sequestering that carbon. Next slide, please. I've mentioned these pieces of legislation a couple of times, and I thought it would be good to just make sure that the specifics were there as a reference on the slide. Again, AB 1279 talks about achieving carbon neutrality by 2045 and reducing anthropogenic or fossil people-based emissions by 85% relative to 1990 levels. So anthropogenic is really all of our energy, industry, commercial, residential, and transportation-related emissions. That was paired with SB 905, which establishes the program that we're talking about today. Next slide, please. So what is the direction in 905 to CARB? You will hear from other agencies about their role, but CARB also has a very specific role here. The first thing that we have to do is adopt protocols and methods for capture and utilization of carbon dioxide removal by January 1, 2024. So that's the first thing. We already actually have a protocol that we're going to be amending over the coming year and adding in some other types of ways to sequester carbon or utilize it. The next one is by 2025, we have to adopt regulations for a unified permit application. So this is just a portal to collect information for the various permits for all of the agencies involved in siting and operating a CCS or CDR project. It did not give any new permitting authority to the state. It's just about administrative streamlining for permitting purposes. We also have to develop a centralized database to track the deployment of CCUS and CDR so that the public has a central repository that they can reference to understand what's going on in terms of the different projects and locations of projects. We also have to do a suite of regulations for operators that are going to do these projects. And that suite of regulations is for the site of capture of carbon and then the site for injection of carbon, but it's all above ground regulation for that space. Next slide, please. Another key part of SB 905 that relates to CARB is the key air protection provisions for projects. These were developed with consultation and with discussion with some of the environmental justice advocates, but ultimately they reflected where the legislature decided they wanted to provide direction to CARB. So we have to create an air monitoring and mitigation plan to track and minimize potential toxic air contaminants and criteria pollutants at the site of carbon dioxide capture, removal, or sequestration, and submit that plan to the state board. So that's what each operator would have to do. The other key things is that they must avoid any significant impact on residents in communities affected by high cumulative exposure burden caused by potential net increase in air, water, and soil production emanating from the site of carbon capture. And so this is really making sure that the first tenet of doing these projects is to avoid any increases in emissions. But if those cannot be avoided, then they must be mitigated. And so there's no new requirements that CARB or the state was given in terms of regulating these sources. It's just direction to make sure that we are developing regulations that call for avoiding as best as possible with the best technology, those emissions from increasing in those heavily burdened communities. But then also if it's not able to be minimized, then we have to make sure they are mitigated. Next slide, please. And so then finally, what are the results of the scoping plan? This slide provides all the high level messaging from that plan. It would cut air pollution by 71%. It would slash greenhouse gas emissions by 85%, drop gas consumption by 94%, create 4 million new jobs, and it would save $200 billion in health costs due to pollution in just a single year in 2045. And with that, I will conclude and hand it back to Sarah or the next speaker, and look forward to hearing all the comments today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajender. Really appreciate you. All right. Oh, we want to go back one. There we go. Okay, perfect. So Lisa, my esteemed colleague in the office right next to me, it's your turn.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. I'm Lisa Halko, lead counsel for the Department of Conservation, and I'm working with CNRA on the legal framework to govern pore space for geologic carbon sequestration. Thank you for being here today for this important conversation. Next slide, please. As you've probably read, pore space is the microscopic gaps between the solid particles of rock. It's like a rock sponge. CO2 would be injected into those microscopic pores and will eventually solidify. The rock formations containing the pore space underlie multiple parcels of land, which may have multiple owners. This image is obviously not to scale, but it shows how broad the formation may be with multiple parcels on the surface. The pore space framework would govern the relationships among all the entities who share rights to the pore space and the earth above it. Next slide. The legislature assigned the Secretary of Natural Resources, in consultation with CARB and a long list of other agencies, including the Energy Commission, the State Lands Commission, and the Attorney General, to, I'll read the whole quote, publish a framework for governing agreements regarding 2 or more tracts of land overlying the same geologic storage reservoir or reservoirs for purposes of managing, developing, and operating a carbon dioxide capture, removal, or sequestration project. The legislature requires the framework to be completed by July 1, 2025, but next slide, please. Given the deadlines for other actions under SB 905, including CARB's regulations on sharing pore space, the framework will be more relevant and more supportive of other agencies' actions if we do it sooner. We hope to finish a year early with the framework for governing agreements regarding 2 or more tracts of land overlying the same geologic storage reservoir or reservoirs for purposes of managing, developing, and operating a carbon dioxide capture, removal, or sequestration project. That's quite a mouthful. We'll never finish if we have to say that all the time. So next slide. Here's a new acronym we plan to use in our discussions. A Common Reservoir Operation Plan, CROP or CROP, is a plan or agreement for operating a sequestration reservoir of pore space that is common to multiple overlying parcels and their various surface and subsurface interests. Next slide, please. As we develop the framework for common reservoir operating plans, these are the values that will guide us. We need geologic carbon sequestration to meet California's aggressive and absolutely necessary climate goals. That means acting with urgency. At the same time, we need equity in community costs and benefits with no sacrifice zones. This means applying the lessons we've learned in our 150-year history of fossil fuel development. At the end of the 19th century, oil was the new clean option that was expected to power new clean technologies like automobiles, which would not leave horse poop all over the streets to cause public health problems. The policies intended to encourage oil development had some unintended consequences. The benefits were widely shared, but with some communities bearing a disproportionate share of the costs. We shouldn't make the same mistakes again. Finally, we need fair compensation for everyone whose interests are affected. Next slide, please. This slide shows 9 elements that the legislature included in the framework for common reservoir operation plans. First, what agency should provide regulatory oversight by approving or denying them? Second, the framework must require crops to have agreement from 75% at least of the total interests affected. Third and fourth, the framework must require a good faith offer of fair compensation. And fifth, surface monitoring standards. Note, monitoring will be needed during the injection phase as well as post-injection phases. The next 3 framework elements relate to financial responsibility, allocation of liability, financial assurance to secure funds necessary to keep the site safe, and allocation of royalties. Finally, there's a catch-all for other issues that are legally or constitutionally required. You can see there's a lot to talk about. And on the next slide, please, you can see that we want to talk with you. Here's a general timeline, and I also have some detailed information. We were just in time to add to the slide. On September 19th, we'll kick off our public engagement with a virtual meeting announcing a schedule of meetings in small groups where people can really talk about the difficult details and identify different options for the framework elements. We will also hold larger regional workshops, both in person and online, during September and October. Then we'll review the options and prepare a draft framework. Section 71-461, where this portion of SB 905 is codified, requires a 90-day public comment period, which we expect to start in December of this year by circulating the draft framework. After the comment period closes in March 2024, we'll revise the framework and, if all goes well, publish it that summer. Next slide, please. Thank you again for being here. Please join us on September 19th. Sarah, back to you.
Thanks, Lisa. Jamie, I'm going to have you leave this slide up just for a second so that folks can take note of these dates. And we will send a message out. We've gotten a bunch of messages about the slides. Yes, all the slides are going to be posted online. We'll drop the link of where you can get them, and the recordings will also be posted online. All righty. So can we go to the next slide? Uh-oh. I hope it isn't just frozen for me. All right, Jamie, you want to come off mute for a sec?
Sure, Jeremy, you're next. If you can see your slide up right now, as I can on my end, please begin your presentation when you are ready.
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome, Jeremy.
Great. Thank you, Sarah and Jamie. Good morning. My name is Jeremy Lancaster. I'm the Associate State Geologist with the California Geological Survey, and I'm going to provide an overview of the Geologic Carbon Sequestration Group as mandated by SB 905 that is within the California Geological Survey. Next slide, please.
Uh-oh, we might be having a little delay with the internet.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, thank you. So the Geologic Carbon Sequestration Group is mandated to provide independent expertise and regulatory guidance to the California Air Resources Control Board, including but not limited to several things, and I'm going to talk about those. So number one is the identification of high quality suitable locations for Class 6 injection wells. So a Class 6 injection well is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's designation for wells used to inject carbon dioxide into deep rock formations for the purpose of long-term sequestration. We're also tasked with identification of appropriate subsurface monitoring to ensure the sequestration of carbon dioxide. Next slide, please. Okay, third, the identification of hazards such as induced seismicity that might require the suspension of carbon dioxide injection, and that the state geologist and this new geologic carbon sequestration group shall report seismic activity and subsurface leakage of carbon dioxide from a project to the State Air Resources Board, and may recommend changes to operations of the project to the state board. Next slide, please. I apologize for the delay. We are having some minor connectivity issues.
Thanks, Jeremy. Jamie, I know you're advancing it on your side. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so so a little bit more detail on each of those mandates. We will be performing a statewide suitability analysis. We'll be working with the Air Resources Board to evaluate new technologies and approaches to carbon sequestration within the state. We believe this proactive approach will build on work that was done in the state to analyze the suitability of geologic reservoirs, and will provide products to stakeholders on the general distribution and nature of geologic reservoirs and potential risks. So the map on the right shows point source emissions for carbon dioxide throughout the state. And then in green and purple are geologic formations that are potentially conducive to the geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide. Next slide, please. Okay, we're tasked with the identification of appropriate subsurface monitoring to ensure the geologic sequestration of injected carbon dioxide. So when I talk about subsurface monitoring and injected carbon dioxide, I really mean tracking how the CO2 plume is dispersed in the subsurface in the geologic reservoir. So the map and illustration on the bottom right is an example from the Sleipner CO2 carbon sequestration project in Norway. And you can see there is an injection well that is injecting supercritical carbon dioxide into a geologic reservoir. And that reservoir is capped by an impermeable layer that seals off the formation and doesn't allow the carbon dioxide to escape upward. We monitor the spread and the containment of the carbon dioxide within that geologic reservoir by using things like time-lapse seismic reflection data. So that's the column on the right showing a time sequence of subsurface images from 1994 through 2008. And so seismic reflection data is kind of like ultrasound that you'd use to image a baby inside of a mother's womb. We do the same thing with the Earth. In this case, the seismic reflection profile shows nothing in 1994. That was prior to injection. Injection started in 1999 on the Sleipner project. And then you can see 2001, a signature, these dark horizontal lines is a signature of that carbon dioxide spreading out away from the injection well. Over time, you can see 2008, it spread out much more, but it hasn't migrated upward through that seal or that cap rock. Next slide, please.
Thanks for your patience, everyone, while we're dealing with the slow internet. Of course, it happens this morning.
Great. Okay, and the third and fourth item in the statute is, the identification of hazards that may require suspension of carbon dioxide injections, and that the state geologist shall report seismic activity and subsurface leakage to the Air Resources Board. We will be monitoring earthquakes. So we anticipate that the project operator will deploy a seismic monitoring system. That'll have to be an approved system and monitoring plan that will be tied to a statewide system. So next slide, please. So for awareness purposes, the California Geological Survey operates the largest array of seismic stations throughout the state of California. We have more than 1,200 seismic stations and more than 10,000 instruments to monitor earthquakes, naturally occurring earthquakes and induced earthquakes. We work with our partners at the Berkeley Seismology Lab and and Caltech and their seismology laboratory, and then our partners with the USGS. Everybody is connected to the California Integrated Seismic Network, and that is our state's network for reporting earthquakes. Next slide, please. So the goal is to tie in the seismic monitoring system developed by the project operators into that statewide integrated system. And then we will be communicating both naturally occurring and induced earthquakes around projects via an online map-based communication tool and dashboard. And then we would also be communicating to the California Air Resources Board. So the maps that I'm showing on the screen here, the left map, this is from the Alberta Geological Survey. They're monitoring induced seismicity from a different type of injection process. But this shows all of the earthquakes from 2006 to 2023, and then induced, filtering of all those earthquakes to those that are thought to be that were induced earthquakes during that same time period. So this is kind of a tool that we will use to communicate earthquake activity, both natural and induced, around project areas. We'll be asking questions like, is seismicity close to the well bore or the injection well that could pose a risk to that well bore? And then how big are the events? Are they large enough to be felt by humans? The threshold for felt earthquakes is between magnitude 2 and a magnitude 2.5. And that depends on distance. You have to be really close to feel an earthquake that small. The maximum earthquake that we, based on our research, that we have seen from carbon sequestration projects is a magnitude 3. So that's just above that felt threshold, but it's well below the threshold of damaging earthquakes, which is about a magnitude 4 to a magnitude 4.5. We will also be communicating to the Air Resources Board via a traffic light system, sort of a red light, yellow light, green light system. When an induced earthquake is recorded, identified, we would be communicating that to the California Air Resources Board and recommending changes in injection activities. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions or comments, my contact information is here. I thank you for your time and your attention today. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Okay, next slide. So now we have Elizabeth Huber and Virginia Liu from the Energy Commission. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here today with the other agencies to talk about our carbon removal activities. My name is Virginia Liu, and I'll start with information about the Energy Commission's new Carbon Removal Innovation Support Program, also known as CRISP. And my colleague, Elizabeth Huber, will discuss our activities related to carbon capture and power plants. CRISP was created by Assembly Bill 209 in 2022. and it provides financial incentives for projects that advance technologies for direct air capture. Direct air capture technologies, also known as DAC, includes mechanical and chemical processes that capture atmospheric carbon dioxide as opposed to point source capture from smokestacks from industrial or electric generation facilities. As mentioned by Rajinder and LaQuinn earlier, DAC technology is needed to meet the state's GHG reduction goals by 2045. The diagram at the lower left provides an example of one type of DAC technology. In phase one, the ambient air is sucked in and the carbon dioxide is chemically bound to the filter and removed from the airstream on the right and before exiting. In phase two, the carbon dioxide is released from the filter and collected for potential storage or utilization. Our CRISP activities only focus on carbon dioxide capture and ways to decrease energy and resource intensity and cost, and does not include sequestration or storage of the collected carbon dioxide. The table on the right highlights the main elements of our program, and this includes potential establishment of research test centers or possibly providing vouchers to help early stage researchers test and develop new technologies that can reduce energy and resource intensity and improve capture efficiency. Another area is to provide cost share for those applying for federal grants, since federal grant applicants generally must provide 20 to 50% cost share. Another area is providing grants for small-scale demonstrations of DAC technologies. Another area is funding for community engagement and outreach to facilitate education and understanding of community needs. And lastly, there is the potential to provide technical assistance in evaluating these technologies and addressing the California Environmental Quality Act and other environmental permitting needs. The total funding for CRISP is $75 million. This concludes my portion, and I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Huber, who will discuss the CEC's other activities related to carbon capture. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Hello, my name is Elizabeth Huber, and I am the director of the California Energy Commission Siting, Transmission, and Environmental Protection Division. Sorry, our chairman was just calling me. In May of 2022, I'd like to put some context to what we're doing at the Energy Commission. So in May of 2022, the Biden administration announced their intentions to provide funding to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law's $3.5 billion program to capture and store carbon dioxide pollution directly from air. U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm stated, efforts to deeply decarbonize the economy through methods like clean power, efficiency, and industrial innovation, the widespread deployment of direct air capture technologies, and carbon dioxide transport and storage infrastructure plays a significant role in delivering on the president's goal of achieving an equitable transition to a net zero carbon economy by 2050. Then, as stated already, the Caballero and Skinner Bill, SB 905, also has provisions to advance engineered technologies to remove carbon capture pollution by establishing a regulatory framework for carbon removal and carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. So how does the Energy Commission come into this? Well, under our authority, we have California Code of Regulations 1769 that requires any CEC jurisdictional power plant in our fleet that if they make any changes to their existing licenses, performance, design, or operation, they must file a petition with the Energy Commission in order to make those modifications. So in the next slide that I'll be showing you is an overview of 3 carbon capture projects that are either operational or under construction. So next slide, please. The first two are located at our Los Medanos Energy Center, which is a 500 megawatt natural gas fired combined cycle power plant. It was licensed by the CEC in August of 2001. In March of 2022, the CEC approved the first of two carbon capture projects at Los Medanos Energy Center, which was the installation of a flue gas pipe for use in an off-site demonstration project that is manufacturing carbon dioxide sequestrated upcycled rock product. Then in October of 2022, another petition was approved for an on-site project at the Los Medanos Energy Center that will require the power plant to supply approximately 0.5% of flue gas through an above-ground pipeline to a carbon capture and utilization pilot system. The pilot project will be in operation for about 15 months, with the equipment removed from the site after the project is completed.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Yes.
I am so sorry to interrupt, but I just got a message saying that everybody is hearing Spanish and not hearing you in English. So I just want to pause for a moment. And Jamie, maybe you can come off mute, and Marco, and let's just troubleshoot this real quick right now.
No problem. Would
Thanks
you like
for
to
being
go
patient.
back then to the previous
Well, I
slide?
don't know. Let's first find
Caminando
out.
y otro en bici. Bueno, logró agarrarlos, se peleó con ellos, pero así todos se fueron.
Let's see, testing. I'm in the Spanish channel. Who can hear me in the Spanish channel right now?
Oh, you heard the English? Okay.
Testing.
Oh, good. Jamie, you want to come off mute for a second?
Yeah, there's a little bit of confusion here. Apologies for the technical difficulties. There's
So
some
you
of
know
us
what I bet
who-
is happening? So we've got a huge group here. We have 408 people on our meeting. And
Entonces
I know
tenemos un grupo enorme, tenemos 408 en nuestra reunión. Sé que muchos de ustedes nos acompañaron después de las introducciones. Entonces, si usted está escuchando, tal vez quiera.
with a little world icon, and you need to click English. If you're on default, it could be you're for some reason hearing Spanish. So go to the icon, click English, and then write us in the Q&A if that's still not working for you. But Elizabeth, I do not think, oh, if you select English, you hear the Spanish. Okay. Select the globe icon. All right, so I would say, I'm sensitive to time and wanting to get to your comments. And see if you hear English that way. And then write us in the Q&A again if it still isn't working for you. And Elizabeth, I think you should just pick up exactly where you left off, because I think a lot of people could hear you and we're recording. Oh, you're on mute. And thank you for being flexible.
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to go back to the beginning of the slide and so everyone can hear. So what I want to do is highlight the three carbon capture and utilization and storage projects at CEC jurisdictional power plants. The first two are at our Los Medanos Energy Center, which is a 500 megawatt natural gas fired combined cycle power plant. It was licensed by the CEC in August of 2000 and began commercial operation in July of 2001. In March of 2022, the CEC approved the first of these two carbon capture projects at the Los Medanos Energy Center. The first was the installation of a flue gas pipe for use in an off-site demonstration project that is manufacturing carbon dioxide sequestration upcycled rock products at one of our cement aggregate facilities. Then in October of 2022, a petition was approved for an on-site project at the Los Medanos Energy Center that will require the power plant to supply approximately 0.5% of its flue gas through an above-ground pipeline to a carbon capture and a utilization pilot system. This pilot system will be in operation for approximately 15 months to do on-site testing and recommendations from the equipment. And then the equipment will be moved from the site after the project is completed. This project actually launched on the last week of July of this year. And so testing has begun. The third project is a utility scale project at the Sutter Energy Center, which is also a 500 megawatt natural gas fired plant that has been in operation since 2001 and supplies power to both SMUD and the CalISO. Some of the basics of this project is that the carbon dioxide from the flue gas is absorbed in an amine-based solvent, and the pure carbon dioxide is then separated from that solvent into a piece of equipment that separates it. The solvent is then recirculated back into equipment called an absorber, and then it's utilizing a specific company known as Ion Clean Energy. And that is being tested and then transform that solvent that will be designed to support this type of sequestration and storage projects at other facilities. So just to summarize is that this project is looking at 95% carbon capture efficiency when it's at full scale. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to share this information, and I turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you so much. Okay, we've got these links for anybody who wants to follow up. Next slide. All right, so for those of you, we've got a little over 400 people in our meeting, which we're really pleased about. If you joined after we did our initial welcome, my name is Sarah Rubin. I'm going to help us through hearing from you all. So what we're going to do, since there's so many of you online, is we're going to limit comment to 2 minutes. And I'm going to alternate 5 people who are on through the typical Zoom, and then 5 people who are on through telephone, so that we're giving folks who've called in kind of an equal shot at getting in line, so to speak. I'm going to have our email dropped into the chat. If you are feeling like I maybe can't wait as long as it might take to share something verbal, and you would like to just email us, you're welcome to do that. A lot of folks, one other thing before we get to public comment, I want to say is a lot of folks have asked about the slides. Our goal, our hope is to have the slides posted in a week. But what we're going to do is we are going to send a note out to the listserv for this effort, letting you know when the slides are posted, and of course the recordings, and that could end up being 2 emails. So please make sure you have signed up for the listserv that we've created related to this effort, and you can just send an email to the same email that you would send a comment saying add me to the listserv, and we will add you if you're not already on. Okay, if you are on by telephone, the way you're going to let me know you'd like to speak is pushing *9. And otherwise, if you just want to click the raise your hand function, we will know that you would like to make a comment. So my colleague Jeanette is, let me get to the top with the raised hands, is going to bring a clock up. And it looks like Annie G, you are the first person who would like to speak. There we go.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. And then you should see the clock in the corner, everybody.
Perfect. My name is Annie Gillio, and I'm commenting on behalf of the Carbon Removal Alliance. We are made up of more than 20 companies developing and deploying carbon removal technologies globally. We are the first industry-driven coalition committed to achieving gigaton scale with permanent, high-quality solutions. Together, our members represent billions of dollars of investment in climate technologies and virtually all of the permanent carbon removal deployed to date. We focus on carbon removal projects that are permanent, additional, net negative, and verifiable, as well as centered around the needs of communities. And I just want to be clear also that our members represent permanent carbon removal technologies beyond just direct air capture and BECCS. Mechanical CDR is a broad umbrella that covers a number of promising technologies. CRA is strongly supportive of the work CARB is undertaking to implement SB 905. As we've noted in previous written comments to the state legislature, reaching our climate goals, including carbon neutrality by 2045, will require rapid and broad-scale deployment of a host of innovative, low, negative, net zero carbon technologies. Carbon removal is a core part of the 2022 scoping plan paired with steep emissions reductions. These technologies are the only way to address legacy emissions, also a necessary solution for addressing processes and sectors where there are few low or zero carbon solutions available today. SB 905 creates programming that supports California in taking a leading role in pioneering technology solutions that are needed to turn the tide against climate change in ways that benefit all communities in California. We believe that a portfolio of CDR solutions paired with expansive emissions reductions is the right path forward, and we offer ourselves as resources to support the work of CARB. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Hey, Jamie, can you just double check this is recording? We don't miss anything.
Yes, this webinar is being recorded.
Oh, good. Okay. Fabulous. All right. Who else wants to say something? I have no raised hands. There we go. All right. So we've got Virgil and then Virgil, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fabulous. This is Virgil Welch on behalf of the California Carbon Solutions Coalition. First of all, thanks to all of you for the coordination and leadership on this very important process. The 2022 scoping plan update and Senate Bill 905, as you know, were key steps to establish the policy framework we need in California for the deployment of carbon capture and carbon removal technologies, which, as the scoping plan makes very clear, are going to be critical technologies needed to enable achievement of our climate goals. Timely deployment of low carbon technologies like CCS and CDR is key. As we heard earlier in the presentation this morning, meeting a more ambitious 2030 target, not to mention the 2045 target, is going to require expeditious deployment of technologies like CCS and CDR. Clear workable frameworks for pore-space sequestration, or CROP as we're now calling it, and transport of captured emissions via pipeline in the near term will help ensure that these projects, including those that are poised to take advantage of significant federal incentives, can be successfully deployed. Additionally, new protocols to accurately account for innovative carbon removal technology are key to ensure that we are reducing and avoiding emissions everywhere possible. As you all know, the governor and our legislature have been increasingly focused on ensuring that California is taking the needed steps to scale these technologies on the ground. This 905 process is a key part of this effort, and we look forward to working with you all as we move forward. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Jared, you're next. I'm sorry, or it might be Jared.
It's Jared, and thank you for the time and the conversation here. Very important. I'm Jared Daniels, the CEO of the Global CCS Institute. We're an international nonprofit climate think tank with offices all over the world, including Washington, D.C., where I'm based, and our missions to accelerate the deployment of CCS. Our membership includes over 200 organizations that spans governments and corporations, research bodies, NGOs, who all recognize the role CCS has to play in helping reach the net zero future. I'd like to just take 2 minutes and give that brief context of where CCS deployment fits in and its appropriate role alongside everything else we need to do.
Sorry, will you just talk a tiny bit slower for the interpreter?
Sure.
Thank
So the climate science is clear. We need to limit warming to below 1.5 and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We need to curtail our global emissions to reach net zero by mid-century. CCS is a pivotal technology that can help the world rise to this challenge because of its ability to significantly reduce carbon dioxide emissions at their point source, and it can address CO2 already in the atmosphere via carbon dioxide removal technologies, as we've heard from the earlier speakers. Organizations like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have consistently found that CCS has an important role to play because CCS provides significant emission reductions in hard to abate industries. It reduces emissions from the stationary power generation sector and enhances the reliability of our electric power grid. It enables technology-based carbon dioxide removal at scale, and it's also a conduit to a new energy economy that includes hydrogen production and CO2 utilization. As we've heard, it's not new. It's been used safely and effectively for over 50 years. Commercial scale CCS facilities are in operation globally on a wide range of emission sources, including gas processing, ethanol, fertilizer, steel, and hydrogen production, as well as in power generation. My institute tracks this activity. As of last month, there are 37 large-scale CCS facilities in commercial operation, 20 in construction, and over 200 in various stages of development around the world. The total capacity to capture and store of all those operating projects is approximately 50 million tons per year currently. The U.S. is a lead. Yep.
Sorry, we're at time, and I don't mind coming back to you. I just want to double check if you want to share more, but with about 400 people on, I just want to double check if anyone else wants to speak. All right, let's see who we have next. Okay, but Jared, I'm happy to come back to you in a minute. Mark, your turn.
Thank you so much. And can you hear me okay?
I can. You sound great.
Thank you. My name is Mark Zipka. I'm the co-founder and COO at Airmine, spelled AIRMYNE, and we're a Berkeley, California-based direct air capture company. And we just want to extend our appreciation to all folks on this call for helping to develop an all-of-government approach to deploy CCS and direct air capture, where we focus in a responsible way that benefits and reflects the goals of our communities here in California. And just to understate that direct air capture and carbon removal, although these are nascent technologies, so much can benefit from the support of early pilot projects and getting these projects off the ground in the state of California with this support that we're feeling from all the agencies together is a great way to keep the long-term momentum for carbon removal technologies in the state and benefiting our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Cesar, your turn.
Hello. Thank you for this information and the webinar. Appreciate y'all making the time. I know CCS is something that has been touted as a climate solution, but I do want to make sure that being wary of those who are most excited about it, being oil and gas companies. I just want to make sure that, much like the emission reduction credits that were produced and created fraudulently, that CCS is not used to prop up the oil industry and allow them to state that they are doing something for the climate, when in fact they're using this as a tool to propagate their other efforts that will not in fact reduce carbon overall. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cesar. Okay, anyone else like to make a comment? Let's see, Dan, your turn.
Hi, my name is Dan Ress. I'm a staff attorney for the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. And we're based in Kern County and work throughout the San Joaquin Valley. I just echoing Cesar's comments, we have some pretty serious concerns about the way that CCS is being talked about and being kind of ready to deploy, both in terms of climate and kind of locking in climate pollution rather than getting ready to phase it out. Also the significant risks and harms to frontline communities, the same communities that have been harmed by 100 years of environmental racism, and really doubling down on that. But I wanted to focus in on just one concern from the presentation today, and I put this in the Q&A as well, but didn't get an answer. I just saw a lot of emphasis on the parts of SB 905 that are really geared toward what operators must do rather than what CARB has to do. And I'm referring specifically to 39741.1A3, and really want to make sure that those protections are protected, are enforced through law. Right now, they're requirements on CARB, but not on anything external. And we really do need regulations in place for those to have meaning and impact. And those were hard-fought protections in the negotiations, as you all may remember. These are strategies to minimize to the maximum extent technologically feasible co-pollutant emissions, looking at both facilities in operation and from construction. So really want to make sure that that is centered in this rulemaking. I think that's really key. We'll have other concerns that we can address at length and follow up, but just wanted to make sure that that was part of the conversation early on. Thanks.
Thank you. George, you're next. There we go.
Am I unmuted?
We hear you. You sound great.
Excellent, thank you. So very brief comment from me to echo my thanks for all the relevant staff and agencies here taking the efforts to begin this process. I think it's timely and it's important, and we've heard why. Climate is the reason. California does need this family of technologies to meet its both near and mid-century goals. I wish the situation were different. Unfortunately, the climate news is tightening around us. So I'd like to offer our team at Livermore Lab as a technical resource on engineering matters, geological matters, regulatory matters, if staff ever needs it. And also, we're keenly aware that this is not a set of the technologies that's universally supported, that's necessarily well understood. And we think that venues like this one are extremely important in order to chart a path forward that doesn't just serve the climate or a certain faction of interest, but that serves everybody. We spent considerable time over the past few years looking at the environmental, the climate, the local community, environmental justice, and technical aspects of these technologies. And we remain convinced and optimistic that we can make these work for everybody. That's going to take communication, it's going to take openness, and it's going to take some effort. It's not going to happen by itself. I see that as the only option that we have ahead of us. You know, we cannot harm communities with projects, and we also cannot afford to leave this technology option on the table when it comes to climate. So I'm delighted that we have a forum like this and broad participation, and I very much look forward to connecting with everybody over the coming months on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Claude and then Jeff, and then B. Claude? And then I'll come back to you, Jared. You want to unmute Claude? Or can we unmute him? Let's see. Kelsey, can you help me figure out why we can't get Claude unmuted? Maybe we lost. Okay, we will circle back. Let's go to Jeff.
Hi, Sarah, can you hear me?
I do. Go for it.
All right. Thank you guys very much for what you're putting on here today. We appreciate you adding a lot of clarity to this. I am a farmer here in the Stockton-Tracy Delta, and we have been involved in CCS and the negotiations for pore space for probably 2 to 3 years, and it has been far from transparent. We appreciate the task at hand. We know that as farmers, we have an opportunity to participate in this and help our environment through both above ground and below ground storage. We would just like some clarity into the whole process as to how we'll be unitized and valuations going forward. Right now, we're just concerned for getting a fair shot at this, as well as making sure the community is not left behind in this as well. So thank you guys, and really look forward to being involved in this over the coming months.
Thank you. Okay, B, you're next. B?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is B. Mitter-Miller. I'm a volunteer with a group called a nonprofit group San Diego 350, which is an affiliate of 350.org, worldwide organization. Our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I have a question about the earthquake safety system that has been talked about. We all know that predicting an earthquake is hard to do. Maybe immediately before it happens, we hear about it. But I'm just concerned about the safety system that is being set up, and how effective will that really be if there's a major earthquake? Thank you.
Thank you, B. We're taking notes and recording this, and we appreciate all the questions you're asking and questions people put into the Q&A, so we can chew on them all after this meeting. Okay, so Jared, I am coming back to you, and then David, you'll be next, and then Catherine G. So go ahead again, Jared.
Wonderful. I'll take 30 seconds on following up the comments from George Paredes just on community benefits, right? That CCS creates and sustains jobs in communities that have had, historically relied on heavy industries to support the local economy. Steel, cement, and fertilizer are commodities and materials that our modern society relies on to produce crops and build and maintain our infrastructure. We need these materials, but we can't live with the emissions. CCS can help us move forward on that. It's got extensive social value in the communities that rely on these hard-to-abate industries and can help deliver a just transition. What we all need to work on is to ensure that climate justice and these community local concerns are integrated into policymaking. At broader level, in wrapping up, international collaboration as we see it on CCS has never been stronger. We support the Carbon Management Challenge championed by the United States and a growing coalition of countries that aim collectively to deliver gigaton scale of CCS by 2030, consistent with all the global climate math and models. And just please feel free to reach us to the Institute and any follow-up questions, and know we've got much data and resources publicly available on our website. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go to David, and then Catherine, you'll be after David. David, you're up.
Yeah, I'm David Allenbaugh from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I'm I lead the geologic carbon storage program here. And I just wanted to echo George's comments as well as the last speaker's comments, and offering our services to the state and collaborating in whatever way we can to bring, the Department of Energy funding that and the research that's evolved out of the Department of Energy funding over the last 20 to 30 years to benefit carbon storage processes here in the state of California. And so with that, I'll give up the mic.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. Catherine, your turn.
Good morning, Catherine with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. Thank you for the information and the opportunity to comment. This is definitely a huge and complicated undertaking, and it's putting it mildly to say that I am skeptical. The San Joaquin Valley has been made a lot of promises that have failed, like that prisons are economic development, and we are still bearing the consequences of those decisions. Oil and gas infrastructure in Kern County creates pathways for leaks and dangerous levels of exposure for our nearby communities. Dozens of wells have been found to be leaking methane for an unknown period of time, and this erodes our confidence in leak detection of other substances and the monitoring protocols that you all are proposing to lay out. Engineered approaches and DAC delays meaningful climate action and much needed and overdue direct reductions for environmental justice communities. And the promoters of these technologies, particularly the oil industry, clearly have a vested financial interest. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is incredibly expensive, inefficient, and polluting, and storage project operators must assess and prove stable geology. Furthermore, offsets shouldn't be generated by these types of projects in the planning, construction, or operating phases. Definitely more details than we can go over in 2 minutes, but wanted to layer on some additional concerns to what my colleagues have added. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Okay. We've got a couple people joining by phone, and if you are joining by phone, I just want to remind you that you could press *9 to raise your hand and make a comment by phone. And then otherwise, I want to welcome anybody else who's on with us who would like to share any thought. Because I don't have any more hands up, which means, unless someone does raise their hand, we'll begin to wrap up our meeting. Give it another second. So do you want to go to the next slide? So I mentioned it, one more. I mentioned it earlier. I just want to reiterate that we're doing the same meeting again tonight at 5:30. So if you know of anybody who would be interested, please encourage them to join. And otherwise, please be sure you're on our listserv so that you're notified when the slides and the recordings are posted to the web, so you can take a look and share them around with anybody that you would want to. I want to take a moment to thank our speakers and all my colleagues behind the scenes who've worked very hard on making this run well, even with a few tech glitches. We're so grateful to you. And everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye.